Good morning. My name is Graham Biggar. I'm the Director General of the National Economic Crime Centre in the UK. I'm delighted to be speaking again at the Cambridge International Economic Crime Symposium. Very sorry we can't be together, but hope this approach serves everyone's purposes and look forward to being together again, I hope, next year. I spoke last year at the symposium and talked about the initial work we've done to set up the National Economic Crime Centre, the NEC, and the importance of partnerships in doing that. Partnerships across the public sector and partnerships also with the private sector. And I spoke about the importance of data and evidence to target the work we are doing. This year, I'd like to give a flavour of some of the big cases that the NEC and the NCA have been involved in. And I'd also like to give an indication of how we think we need to take forward one of the threat types we look at in particular, which is fraud. So to go into 4 particular cases that cover international illicit finance, high-end cyber and fraud, the money laundering of the proceeds of the drug trade within the UK, and then pure fraud down in the UK against vulnerable victims. So on the first of those, we announced in December last year the conclusion of an investigation into funds that we considered might be the product of bribery and corruption overseas. And in the settlement we reached, which was not an admission of guilt, very important to emphasise that, Malik Riaz, a Pakistan businessman, agreed to the return of £140 million of money that we had frozen through an account freezing order, and also to the return of the proceeds of the sale of a very high value property in London to the Pakistan state. And that was a great example of the work we can do at pace using the new tools that we have at our disposal. The second example I wanted to highlight was the work that we have done with the FBI, this is the NCA, with the FBI and the National Cyber Security Centre, into really high-end cyber hacking and bank fraud. And that resulted in the unsealing of indictments against Maxim Yakubets and his organised crime group, ironically titled Evil Corps, in Washington last year. And that group had been responsible for over £100 million worth of cybercrime and bank frauds. And it was a really impressive 5-year investigation that led to that result. And it's a really good example as well of the way that cybercrime and fraud have started to merge at the very high end. The third example I wanted to go into is what has been happening in the UK in tackling the drugs trade and the way we have used our high-end technical capabilities to get inside that. And that has come through amazing joint work with the French and Dutch authorities to get inside and unlock the EncroChat secure communications device, almost entirely used by criminals in this country and overseas. And the fantastic work done there under Opvenetic has resulted in over 1,000 arrests in the UK, over 80 firearms seized, over 3 tonnes of drugs seized, and also £56 million worth of cash seized in the last few months. This has been largely money and arrests in relation to drugs, but it is also the laundering of the proceeds of that drugs trade. And that work has given us a phenomenal insight into how money laundering happens in the UK, much of which we knew before, but some of which was new, and has allowed us to embark on some new investigations into high-end money laundering and international money controllers in or relevant to the UK. Finally, I'd like to talk about what we have been doing on fraud. We decided late last year that we needed to step up our response to fraud, and we've done that under what we have called Project Otello. And that has brought together more partners and more people to try and step up the response than we have done before. We've set up a fraud intelligence cell. We have done what is only the 4th ever official tasking to policing from the National Crime Agency under the Crime and Courts Act, and we've done that on fraud. And with City of London Police, we ran Op Radian, which was one particular targeted campaign of work against courier fraud, where fraudsters phone up pretending to be from your bank or from the police to say that your accounts have been compromised and to tell you that you need to hand over not only your details but your bank cards, and then turn up on your doorstep to take them from you. That's a fraud that is absolutely terrible and targeted very much at older, vulnerable people, and over the last 2 years has resulted in £12 million worth of money being taken from them and about 3,000 separate victims. The campaign of activity that we ran in January resulted in over 44 arrests and a recovery of a large part of money that had been taken from those victims, and is a great platform on which we can build. The broader work that we did under Otello also allowed us to be in a better place as COVID hit this country, and with it the risk of fraud on the back of COVID. And that has happened, as it has in every disaster. Fraudsters move to take advantage of the disaster and use that to their own ends. And we brought together yet more people there to do three things: to make sure we understood what was happening and the fraud that was happening under COVID, to make sure we could communicate that to the public to help them protect themselves, and also to make sure that we could respond and take action to stop the fraud happening in the first place. We had weekly meetings with a large range of people coming together every week, not just from within law enforcement, but from the banking sector, the insurance sector, from the different parts of the public sector that could be vulnerable to fraud, to make sure we could understand the impact. We put out messaging to the public in a coherent and more coordinated way than we had managed to do with a single website that set out the fraud advice to the public. And then we acted in a number of ways too. We seized hundreds of thousands of illicit face masks. We seized tens of thousands worth of self-test kits that were fraudulent and did not work. We made a number of arrests. We also took action to try and reduce the risk of procurement fraud through the NHS on ventilators and personal protective equipment. And through the work we did there, we've stopped what we think is at least £72 million worth of fraud there. So lots of good activity across those four cases that have been really exciting to be involved in, and we are really proud of. I said I'd say a few words about how we want to take forward work on one particular fraud threat type, and that is fraud. And we think there was an awful lot that we need to do here. We have a threat type, a crime that is increasing by around the different estimates between 5 and 10% per year, that became last year in the UK the single largest crime type, that represents 35% of crime reported into the England and Wales National Crime Survey. That's the single biggest crime type, having overtaken fraud, 35%, and at the moment we have less than 1% of law enforcement officers focused on it. So it is something that we really need to make a step change on. And our plan for doing that is relatively simple and fivefold. We want to have single, coherent leadership and governance across the fraud landscape in the UK in a way that we don't quite have at the moment, with political leadership resting clearly with the Home Office, who are responsible for crime, and operational leadership resting with the NEC to coordinate all the different agencies who are working really hard to tackle it. Secondly, we need to increase and improve the intelligence we have around fraud. At the moment, too much of it is just based on the victim reporting that we get in, which is a vital part of the picture, but only part of the picture. And we need to add to that the data that the banks and other bits of the private sector have, the data that other parts of the public sector have, and also what we can glean from covert intelligence sources within the NCA and across law enforcement. If we can pull together a better intelligence picture, we can understand the trends better, and we can understand where we can focus what will always be limited resources. We then need to decide where we're going to focus those resources, and that takes me on to the third pillar of our plan, and that is to increase the pursue response to fraud. We need to increase the number of investigations into fraud. We need to increase the number of convictions that we get out of fraud. We need to instill more of a deterrent factor back into fraudsters' minds. So we want to increase the investigators and do that both at the national level and also at regional fraud centres sitting alongside ROCUs, recognising that we need to pull together enough people to have a genuine effect on the crime. So that's the third element, pursue. We also need to do a lot under what we call protect, designing out fraud, hardening our systems to make it harder for frauds to happen in the first place. There's been lots of great work on that already from the banks and others. The introduction of confirmation of payee this summer has been a great success, long awaited, and an important tool in stopping authorised push payment fraud, for example. But there is more we can do in that area, and it's much better to design out fraud, to design out crime and stop it happening in the first place than to see it happen and then investigate it. So we want to put lots of effort into upping our game on that, working right across the private sector and the public sector to work out what needs to happen and then make it happen. And then the final element of our plan is to improve the support we give to victims, both through action fraud and then out through local policing. We need to make sure that all the information is properly collected from victims when crime does happen, that they are treated empathetically and supportively, and they are given the guidance on how they can avoid becoming victims of crime again themselves, given that there is a large proportion of fraud that goes to repeat victims. So those are the 5 elements of our plan that we think is necessary to step up the response to fraud in this country. We think it's overdue and important. We are working very closely with government and through the spending review to secure the commitment and resources that are going to be needed to put that into action. It's been great to be part of the symposium again. I look forward to being there in person again next year. Thank you very much.